Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you guys. Hopefully that sound doesn't distract you. But it's really good to see you guys this morning because, in the middle of the night, I didn't know if I was going to get to see you guys this morning. Our group of 22, 23 people we took down to Puerto Rico had a layover in Baltimore. So we rolled in here in the campus parking lot just before 4 a.m. This morning. So I tell you this to let you know that one of my best friends this morning is coffee. So there's really only, we come from different backgrounds, we have different interests in life, but there's only two kinds of people in the room right now, those who are my coffee people and those who hate coffee. So who are my coffee people? Okay, there we go. Don't hide it. You can sip on it this morning, as I am. But coffee, I don't know how you make your coffee. But sadly, I didn't discover the joy of coffee until I was 30 years old when I became a dad. And I've needed it ever since. But I like to doctor up my coffee. Listen, if you're one of those hardcore people and you're like, no, I just want it by itself. Listen, you can drink motor oil your entire life if you want to, but I like to liven it up a little bit. I like this morning, I don't put any sugar in it anymore these days, but I'll put some flavored creamer. My favorite, if anybody finds this, please bring me some, because I cannot anymore, but my all-time favorite is Cinnamon Toast Crunch coffee creamer. Don't knock it till you've tried it, and if you find it somewhere, please let me know. But these days, I love hazelnut, flavor. I think that's a good staple. This morning, I actually tried, I've been trying it, a new flavor for me anyway. It's blueberry cobbler flavor. It's the Walmart brand, and it may sound gross, but it's actually really good, and it will put a smile on your face in the mornings. But the crazy thing about coffee, the way I prepare it is, the ingredients in and of themselves, the individual ingredients really aren't amazing to me. I can drink a cup of water. I drink more water these days, but a cup of water, I'm not really going to crawl out of bed and jump up and down for a cup of water. And if I were to grab the coffee grain container, or if you like to prepare yours with the coffee beans, if you get a spoon and if you just start eating those things by themselves, it's just gross. It doesn't make sense. And no matter whether, if you do like flavored creamer, if you just turn that bottle up, it's just not the same. You're going to be in trouble in other ways, but it's just not the same. But together, they blend to make a masterpiece. And it's amazing when you think about that and apply that to life. So many times in life, we focus on one season, 1 week, 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, one season of life. And we try to define our lives based off of that season, that temporary season. But you see, God's writing a story for us. And that story is not complete yet. And it's a beautiful story when you look at the ups, the downs, the twists, the turns, the mountaintops, and the valleys. But you don't notice the beauty of your story, my story in life, until you step back and you look at the overall picture. And that's why we're doing this series of messages on the life of Joseph. We've titled it When Pigs Fly, because it's just such a common phrase that we hear in this world. Whenever we face an impossibility, or if we know someone who's overcome some type of impossibility, even before we try to overcome something, we tend to say, well, we'll do that when pigs fly. But when we do overcome an impossibility through the power of Christ, it literally looks like pigs are flying in this world. And I just want you to think about one area of your life right now. What is that one area of your life where you would honestly say, Seth, I define this area of my life as as this phrase, I can't. I can't, and you fill in the blank. And I want you to think about that area of your life as we approach continuing Joseph's story in Genesis chapter 41. So in Genesis chapter 41, I want to briefly recap. Last week, Matthew Riley preached a great message on Joseph in prison. What was life like there? And he had a key conversation with two leading characters that stepped up in chapter 40 last week, and it was the cupbearer and the baker of the Pharaoh of Egypt. And those two guys come in, and they were there for a while. You know, Joseph, he's serving them day in and day out, and he notices on one particular day they both look downcast, and he says, "What's up? What's going on with you? Why are you so sad?" And they went on, they explained, they said, "We had some whacked out dreams last night." And Joseph, of course, through the power of the Lord, had that gift of interpreting dreams. He interpreted both of their dreams and hit the nail on the head through the Lord's power. And one of those guys, the baker, ended up dying 3 days later, lost his life. He was impaled. And then, of course, the cupbearer was returned to his position. What had likely happened was there was likely a conspiracy. You know, back in that ancient world, if you want to take out a king, one of the best ways, if you have access, it would be through that king's food and what he drinks. And so those two people oversaw everything that went in that Pharaoh's mouth. And more than likely, there was rumors of a conspiracy. Apparently, the cupbearer was innocent, so of course, he gets out. But when that conversation took place, it was 2 years before what we're about to look at in Joseph's life. Joseph continued to be in prison. Chapter 41 in Genesis, beginning in verse 1, it says, "When 2 full years had passed," and I want to pause right there. That's the context that I'm telling you about. 2 full years. Say full. They didn't fly by. Like that word in the Hebrew is meant to really magnify that, hey, this was a long time. He sat there over and over and over again, feeling forgotten. And he felt forgotten because, I want to take you back to a previous conversation he had with the cupbearer back in Genesis chapter 40. I'm going to read to you verses 14 and then verse 23. This is Joseph speaking to the cupbearer. And he says, "When all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put into a dungeon." Let's skip ahead to verse 23. "The cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him." You know, with this many people in the room and those of you watching online, more than likely, there are some of you who feel forgotten. You feel overlooked, even in your prayer life. You know, you see Jesus moving in other people's lives. We all have those areas of I can't in our lives, those impossibilities. And it can be excruciating when we see Jesus moving through the lives of other people. It's hard to celebrate, right? It's hard to really draw close to people whenever the Lord's moving in their lives. And feeling forgotten can be excruciating in life. So if you feel forgotten, if you feel overlooked, neglected, please lean into this story because this message is for you. And if you would honestly say, "Seth, I don't feel overlooked today. Life is great. I feel like I'm on a mountaintop. It's going really well." Today's story is for you as well because we're going to see through Joseph those two extremes take place in his life. So back to verse 1 in Genesis chapter 41. "When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile River." And I want to see a show of hands for those of you where you have just had at least one really weird, crazy dream in your life, where you had a question mark and you're thinking, is that from God or is that something I ate really late last night? Okay, we've had those dreams. Like, how do you know, like, if it's from the Lord? Sometimes we don't. Sometimes it can just be something we ate. but there are key moments in the history of this world where the Lord communicates through dreams. There's areas of our world, especially the Eastern Hemisphere right now, where Jesus is drawing people to salvation through dreams, through visions, where they're not blessed like we are with the written word, but Jesus is moving and he's finding ways to communicate. So what's going on here is absolutely crazy, because Pharaoh, this polytheistic pagan, and I want to emphasize that for a moment. In that culture, I want to explain their religion to you. They worshiped on average, they recognized on average on any given year, 80 deities. Now, I don't know about you. I've got 4 kids, and it's hard for me at times to keep names straight. Like 80 deities, lowercase g gods. And they would worship them, and they would have different temples throughout their land. And if you're a common person, you couldn't even go into all those temples. But this Pharaoh was viewed as the chief of their deities. These 2 gods, a god and a goddess, got together, and they had some offspring. This Pharaoh was believed to be the direct descendant, the son of these supreme gods. And his role was not to function like in our culture, this separation of church and state. Their government reigned, period. It was everywhere. And their government was supposed to reflect their gods, their deities. So this Pharaoh, who thought that he was deity in and of himself, has this crazy dream. I'm going to tell you about the dreams. He had 2 dreams, back to back, same night. The first one, he's standing by the Nile, and he's looking around, and he notices these 7 huge cows, like healthy, big, husky, thick, and they come out of the Nile River and they start feasting on grass right along the Nile. It was a really fertile area, which nothing takes him by surprise there. It's something he probably saw here and there. And all of a sudden, these 7 scrawny, nasty, mangy-looking cows crawl up out of the river, and they don't start eating grass like you would think a cow would do. They start eating the other cows, consuming them. Now, just like you or me, kind of gets weird at that point in the dream. The dude wakes up, okay? Probably wonders, man, what in the world is this? Somehow he calms himself down, he goes back to sleep, and he has another dream where once again he's standing on the edge, the banks of the Nile River. And he has this vision of a single stalk of grain. There were 7 heads that sprouted out that were very healthy, coming from this single stalk, which was common, in their agricultural culture. He's used to stuff like that. But all of a sudden, these 7 parched, very dry grains, sprouts of grain come out, and they're withered by the eastern wind. They're not healthy. And all of a sudden, they start consuming the 7 healthy grains. He wakes up at that point. Once again, what is this? Cannibalism? What's going on? This is crazy. And it bothers him. Jump ahead in Genesis chapter 41. Let's jump ahead to verse 8. It says about Pharaoh, in the morning his mind was troubled, and so he sent for all of his magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret them for him. Say no one. This is the world power guy. This is the number one powerful guy on the planet at this time. He had the military, he had the money, he had the resources, he had the wealth, the influence. In his mind, he is a son of the gods. And he calls his inner cabinet in together. And he had the best of the best. He had the people that nobody else in the country had access to. They all get together in a room, and he gives them the dreams. And they said, that is whacked out. We can't help you. And he goes around the room. You've got to be able to help me. You're a wise magician. I've got you here for a reason. He couldn't. She couldn't. He goes around. No one could interpret that dream for him. And, of course, there's a servant who was in last week's story, the cupbearer. More than likely, they needed some drinks during these meetings, whatever they were drinking, and this cupbearer would come in and out. He hears the conversation, and when he realizes that nobody in that particular Egyptian cabinet could do anything for the Pharaoh, this cupbearer speaks up. Listen to what he says in verse 9. It says, "Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, 'Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream on the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now there was a young Hebrew who was in there, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of the dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. And so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh.'" It's crazy how fast God moves when he decides to do something, isn't it? Like, here's a guy, Joseph, forgotten in prison, but being forgotten was nothing new for him. 17 years of age, he is his daddy's favorite. He's got the position in the family, oversees his older brothers. He'd rat them out with all the livestock that they cared for if they didn't do a good job. He was his daddy's favorite, had the robe, had the life, had the dreams, where God told him, hey, one day even your family will bow down to you. But in his immaturity, of course, he boasts, he brags, and didn't turn out well for him. His brothers beat him up, throw him in the pit, only to get him out of the pit, to sell him to a tribe of the Ishmaelites, a caravan going down to Egypt. He's sold in slavery to Potiphar, who, once again, he rises, becomes the favorite of all the people in Potiphar's house. Amazing. That's miraculous in and of itself. And then all of a sudden, one day, this Potiphar's wife, she's lusting after him day in and day out. He keeps saying, no, no, no. I love my God more than you. I'm going to honor my master more than you. I will not do what you're asking me. And then all of a sudden, she accuses him of some acts that he was innocent of, and he is landed into prison. Once again, into prison, he starts to rise up. The Lord's raising him up again, but once again, he's in the prison. He rubs elbows with this cupbearer who was supposed to 2 years earlier say something. So at least when he was 17 years old, at this point in his story, he's around 30, at least 30. So 17 years goes by, creeps by, crawls by, drags by slowly. And then all of a sudden, in one day, he goes from a slave in prison to called before Pharaoh, the king of really the world at that time. And can you imagine what that was like? I don't know about you, but I've had those moments. I've had those moments in life that I've prayed and prayed and prayed, and it's just drug on. And it feels like God's listening to other people's prayers, but what this story teaches us is persevere. Don't give up on the Lord. When he is not working around you, first of all, he is working around you whether we recognize it and can see it or not. He is lining things up for his glory, his great purposes for our lives. However, sometimes whenever we can't see him at work, he's always wanting to do something in us. And over those 13 years, this Joseph, God had really strengthened his character day in and day out. He guarded his attitude. He guarded his heart. He grew in his faith until he was ready for this very moment, going before Pharaoh. So suddenly, whatever he was doing, it was such a low-end task in the prison. He gets word, hey, Pharaoh wants to see you right now. So he has to shower, shave. He has to put on the right clothes. He goes before Pharaoh, and check this out. Verse 15, it says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer that he desires. So he's standing before Pharaoh. This is his one ticket to get out. And Pharaoh says, hey, I've heard, more than likely that baker is not the baker, but the cupbearer. He's kind of close. I picture in my mind, like the Pharaoh looking at him, like, I've heard this dude over here, he speaks really highly of you. I've never seen you in my life, but nobody in my cabinet can interpret these dreams. I've heard that you can. And Joseph looks at him in that moment, and his opening words were, I can't. And I picture silence. Whenever we're reading this story, it's easy to just to fly through it with the details. I picture a moment of silence. And that cupbearer gulped. Okay. I do not want to go back with him to prison. I've gotten this dude here in this moment. I finally remembered him. And now he says, I can't. But then Joseph looks at Pharaoh and he says, but my God can. Every single one of us in this room, we have an area of life that can define us if we're not careful. We have those impossibilities, our can'ts in life. But God's can surpasses our inabilities. It is greater than our can'ts. And I don't know what your area of life where you would just say, Seth, I can't do it. You know what we should do in those areas? We shouldn't get downcast. We shouldn't give up. What we should honestly do is celebrate the fact that we cannot do it. Because it's an area of our lives where we can open up ourselves, open our hands up to the Almighty and say, I believe that you can. And this is not like a genie in the bottle faith here. This is not a health and wealth gospel where we try to be good to get him to be good to us. He's God. He can do anything. He works all things for his good. But in those moments of our inabilities, we've got to remember he is greater. And whether he moves on our behalf the way we want to or not, like if you think of Joseph's story, his dream life was rolling around throughout his family, extended family, being the foreman, bossing his brothers around for life. He had the life. God's purposes for him were even greater than that. And sometimes we have to go through those dips in life, those seasons that we don't enjoy, because God is at work lining everything else up for his glory and in his timing. And so Joseph, he stands before Pharaoh and he says, I can't, but my God can, and my God will do this. It tells us something else about Joseph. He knows the Lord. This is no like snotty-nosed brat anymore. This is a man who walks with the Lord in a dungeon every day. And he recognized when his Lord wants to move and when he doesn't want to move. And he knew in his heart of hearts, my God's wanting to speak to Pharaoh through this. And then moving right along, let's jump ahead to going down to verse 25. The preceding verses that we're skipping over, Pharaoh just kind of retells his dreams to Joseph, which we've already heard. So Joseph hears the details of the dreams. Let's jump ahead down to verse 25. It says, Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one and of the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Those of you that can remember the early details of Joseph's story, I want you to think back to when he was 17 years old, boasting and bragging to his brothers and even his parents. Like, he's a changed man at this point. He's talking to Pharaoh, the king of the world at that point, and he can't stop talking about his God. The first thing that comes out of his mouth is, I can't, but let me tell you about the God who can. And then he recants. He says, those 7 years and all of your dreams, the 7 years are represented 4 times, basically. The good cows, the good grains, those are 7 good years. And then the 7 shriveled up grains and the 7 just scrawny, cows. Those are all 7 terrible years. And he goes on and he describes what these years will be like next. Verse 29, it says, 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has already been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And so he's saying this is going to take place. There will be 7 amazing years, abundance. Like we're going to kick our heels up. This land is going to see an agricultural return that we've never seen in our lifetimes. And it's going to be absolutely amazing. But then 7 years of famine is going to come and hit us like no other famine in the past. And that famine will be so severe, those hard times, that we won't even remember the good old days. We'll just complain. We'll be overtaken. And so Joseph, you talk about bravery, like courage right here. He's talking to Pharaoh as a slave, saying, my God is greater than you. You think you're a son of the gods and that you have control. Let me tell you about the God who is sovereign, the God who is greater than you and your gods. He is about to do these things, and there is nothing you can do about it. I picture once again that room's getting really quiet, and people are leaning in thinking, is this Joseph guy about to get impaled as well? And then Joseph shifts here. You see, with the Lord's power, Joseph not only interpreted the dreams, Joseph takes it a step further. And it says in verse 33, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man, put him in charge of all the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land in order to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. Don't overlook this. This is a slave giving advice to a king. Joseph has come a long way. He doesn't back down. He says, I can't, but my God can. Let me tell you what my God can do. Now here's what you need to do, Pharaoh. Here's my advice for you. He puts it out there, and that's a very awkward moment because there were chief advisors, there were chief magicians, and Joseph was not a part of this inward circle. But he speaks out and just with a courageous voice to this king on this planet. And he says, you need to do this, X, Y, Z, or these terrible things will take place. And thankfully, verse 37, the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. And so Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Now, I want to explain something first of all. I do not think that, this Pharaoh, he mentions God. It's the Hebrew for Elohim, which was actually it's not only one of our God's names, but it was used in pagan cultures as just a generic God, like multiple gods. It was plural. We in our faith see it as Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the community in one God in a community together. We worship Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But this Pharaoh is simply saying, he's not saying, I'm going to bow down to your God. He's simply saying, the spirit of the gods rests in this guy. And he was recognizing wisdom. And there's a lot of encouragement there for us because you and I on any given week, we're going to find ourselves in situations where we may not have the dominating voice in the room, where other people have influence. And we can put all this pressure on ourselves to think that we need, going into these meetings, whatever they are, we've got to present the full gospel in one conversation and get someone to make a decision right then. Where what Joseph can teach us right here is sometimes in those conversations, people who are far apart from the Lord need the ability to recognize the Lord's attributes first. Everybody can recognize love. Everybody can recognize discernment, wisdom. And this Pharaoh, this pagan man, this ruler, he recognized good leadership. And he hears it in Joseph. And then he looks around the room and he says, can any of you do this better? Once again, I think you could hear a pin drop because all those dudes had failed. Like, I just picture him going around the room. Who can step up and do this? What this guy did something, a rhetorical question. Can we find anyone else here in our cabinet who can do what this man just did through the wisdom from one of the gods? And there's that open window. There's that open door of consideration here with Pharaoh. We know according to history, he didn't really fully submit to the Lord or anything like this, but we do also know from history it influenced him. And he recognized there is something different about Joseph. And so I want you to think about your impossible situations. Who are the authorities in your life that just grate you? You wish, you have those thoughts of, hey, if I had a voice, I would do things differently. I would do this or I would say this. We have those areas of life and we can feel so paralyzed. When we don't have the leadership or the power in a moment, don't overlook the power of influence. We can influence anybody in any given moment through the power of Christ. And Joseph teaches us that beautiful truth right here. So Pharaoh asks, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Verse 39, it says, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all of this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. You know, if Joseph had the ability to think in that moment, if we could sit down with him and ask him, hey, what's greater or what's better? God's dream for your life or yours? And I've already mentioned in the past, he just wanted to boss his brothers around. And one day, in the dreams the Lord gave him, he would even be the one that even his parents would bow down to. But this is a position. He was second in power of a nation. He went from a dungeon to a palace through the Lord's wisdom, through the Lord's might. When God moves, he moves. Sometimes he moves slowly, but when he decides to move, when everything lines up, a lot can happen in just one day. Don't underestimate the power of our God. And so many years have passed since this ancient story. You know, most of us are probably not going to leave here and go to jail or prison to spend tonight. You know, so what and we're probably not going to go talk to a Pharaoh or anyone like that today. So what in the world does this story mean for our lives? I want to give you a resounding truth that every time I read this story this week, the Lord just took me to this reality. And it runs throughout this entire chapter. And here it is. God's can surpasses your can't. God's can surpasses your can't. Notice I didn't say what God will do, because we're not in control, and he is. But our faith needs to be a living, active faith that is not dictated by our circumstances. And when God moves in certain ways, we shouldn't even try to put him in a box and predict him or even tell him what to do. Joseph lived life each and every day. When he fell on his face, he got up. He didn't stay there because he knew long term, my God's greater than my circumstances. And so as we prepare to close, we're gonna go into a response time. I want you to just draw a circle around your life and your mind. And I want you to evaluate your heart and your life. You know, God has given every single one of us abilities. You know, some of you would be kind of craftsmen. You know, if something needs fixing or something like that, God's given you the ability, the wisdom, the discernment there. He has not given me that. So if you've got those abilities, I need a multitude of people around me in life like that. Or maybe the Lord's given you some relational wisdom. Maybe you may not think it's big or great, but he's given that to you. Maybe he's given you some insight in life. Maybe he's given you some discernment. to where you just don't realize at times how huge that is. We have different skill sets, different gifts that come through the Holy Spirit, and every single one can be amazing if we give it to the Lord in our moments of discomfort, despair, when we feel forgotten. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is just highlight an area of your life in your mind. What is that area that is defined by this one phrase? I can't. And it bothers you. You wish you could, because we live in this self-made culture. You know, be your own man, be your own woman. You can do it. Roll up your sleeves, work harder, sweat, do whatever it takes and push through. But there's some areas of life, and it's not meant for us to overcome. It's meant for Christ to be seen and revealed. What is that area of life for you? I'm going to ask everyone to stand to your feet. And, a couple of weeks ago, I was at CIY down in Tennessee, and I absolutely loved what some of the people had the teens do, and even myself and the adults who were there. We took on this posture in our prayer life, and I just want to invite you into this posture here. I want you to think about whatever area of your life, what is your can't in life, and I want you to take this posture on right now. This posture, what it means is simply this: I can't, but you can. And whether he does or doesn't do in that area of life, we recognize that he has that ability. Rather than holding on to our frustration, our failures, whatever feelings we may have, or even holding on to that insecurity of not being able to do something, we lift it to him and we say, I can't, but you can. I want everybody in the room to take this posture right now. We're just going to have a moment of silence. And I want you to give your can't to the one who can. In your own words, just talk to him for a moment and lift it up to him. Jesus, right now in this moment, we praise you for our inabilities. We praise you that we are fearfully and wonderfully yet frail in life. You made us in amazing ways, but we are weak and you are strong. And right now, we're just taking on this posture, and we're not trying to manipulate you or get you to do something you don't want to do, but we lift up our can'ts to you, and we put them in your lap, because we recognize that who you are and what you can do. And we just trust you and your wisdom and your discernment. We give our can'ts to you, and we call out to you because you are our God who is greater. You are our God who can. And in faith, we lay it all before you. And as a faith family here, I pray going away from this moment that we will hold each other accountable. That if we have this tendency of putting things in your lap, and then when we turn around, we run back and we take it with us. May we really give our can'ts to you, because your can surpasses all of these things. In faith, we lay it before you, and we just want you to have it. We recognize that you're greater. And right now, I pray that your Holy Spirit will continue to move throughout this song as we worship you. I pray that whatever response you want folks to do, that you will just let them know, hey, I am here, and I am for you, and I want to be with you, and I want to be with you as you walk through your can'ts. And I just pray you'll increase our faith. Give us a faith like Joseph. Give us a faith that can endure the dungeons, the prisons, the pits, because you're greater, and we worship you for that. You and you alone are awesome. Amen. Let's worship him together. If you want some alone time to pray, the foot of the stage is open. I have one challenge, that nobody comes up here alone. You know, if you're wanting to come up here and pray to Christ, grab someone around you and just say, hey, would you come up here with me and no one's going to walk up and say, what have you said? What have you done? This is a safe place for you to go to Christ. But if you do want someone to pray with you, we would absolutely love that opportunity in the prayer room right over here during this response song. So let's worship our God